Hello, welcome back to my office. It's been a wee while since we've been here. We had been meeting together on Wednesday evenings to study God's Word together, but unfortunately we're not able to do that right now. Hopefully we will be able to do that again soon. But in the meantime, we're going to do these videos every Wednesday evening, and whenever we join together again, we'll carry on in the same series. We're starting a new series this evening in Hebrews chapter 11. That chapter is often called the Hall of Faith, all about these Old Testament characters and their faith in God. So we're going to start that this evening. We're going to look at the first 4 verses of Hebrews chapter 11. But before we look at those verses, we want to read from Genesis chapter 4, and it will become really obvious in a moment why we're reading from Genesis 4 first and then from Hebrews 11. So let's hear God's Word. First of all, from Genesis chapter 4. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favour on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favour. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were there in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. And then we're going to flip over in our Bibles into the New Testament, towards the back of the New Testament, and into Hebrews. And we're going to read these first 4 verses of Hebrews chapter 11. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offering. And by faith Abel still speaks even though he is dead. Amen. I don't know what your memories of school are. I have a few memories of school, and one of the really incredibly vivid memories I have of school is being in a science class whenever I was about 14 years old. I think that's 3rd year, isn't it? And I was sitting at the desk in science, and we were doing about elements and how they join together, and doing these little equations, or the teacher at least was doing these equations on the board of how these letters and little numbers come together, and we were meant to be able to follow along and do it as well. And as we were sitting there in that class, I remember staring out the window at the football pitch and wishing I was out there desperately, and thinking, what on earth is the point of this? Why is she bothering to teach us this? What use is any of this? What is the point? Maybe you're watching this video this evening and you're thinking to yourself, Hebrews, what's the point? Why? What's it all about? Hebrews chapter 11, why is it important? Why should we look at it? Why should I watch the rest of this video? Why shouldn't I just knock it off and go and watch something more interesting? What's the point of all of this? Well, we already know what the point is, don't we? We saw the point of Hebrews in the lead up to Christmas. Remember, we had that series on Sunday mornings called Fixated, where we were looking at Hebrews, and we wanted to see in Hebrews that the point of Hebrews is about being fixated on Jesus, being completely focused on Jesus, being people who love Jesus and want to follow him no matter what, no matter where the path leads. John Piper, the famous Baptist pastor in America, says that Hebrews, it's all about people choosing Jesus and choosing the dangerous path of love. That's what this is all about. Focusing, being focused completely on Jesus. We see that in the previous chapter, in chapter 10, verses 32 to 39. The people who originally read this letter were not entirely sure who they were. We're also not entirely sure who wrote this letter. But the people who first read this letter, they had had a difficult time for following Jesus. Following Jesus had meant that some of them had been imprisoned, and many of them had been pushed to the edge of society. And lots of them had lost most, if not all, of their worldly possessions. But they were okay about it. Why were they okay about it? Because they were focused on Jesus. They knew that what they had in and with Jesus and what is to come in Jesus, being with him forever in perfection, is far better. Is far better than anything else in this world. At the heart of following Jesus then, at the center of following Jesus is faith. Is faith. And that's the focus of chapter 11. In verses 1 to 3 of chapter 11, the writer explains what faith is. And then throughout the rest of the chapter, more or less, he gives examples of faith to help us to understand what faith in God, faith in Jesus looks like. So that's how we're going to approach this time. I was going to say this evening. It's not even evening here when I'm recording this. But that's how we're going to approach this. We're going to look at the first 3 verses first of all, and we're going to see faith explained, and then we're going to look at this first example here we have in Hebrews chapter 11 of faith. We're going to look at this guy Abel and the sacrifice that he made to God, and we're going to see how that is an example to us of faith. So first of all, faith, an explanation, verses 1 to 3. There are some words or concepts or ideas that are really difficult to explain. Try to explain or try to describe a colour to somebody without pointing at the colour or saying the name of the colour. Really difficult. Try explaining left and right. That's confusing, isn't it? Try explaining left and right to a kid. Even some adults still get mixed up with left and right. Try explaining or describing the taste of water. It's really difficult. And here we have something in these first 3 verses that is really difficult to explain. Faith. It's really hard to explain faith without using the word faith. But that's what the writer does. Well, he does use the word faith, doesn't he? Because that's what he's explaining. But in verses 1 to 3, he explains or he tells us what faith is. Let's look at verse 1 again together. It says this. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. What we hope for are things that are still to happen. They haven't happened yet. They're in the future, if you like. So if we are followers of Jesus, what are we hoping for? We are hoping that Jesus will someday return. We are hoping that he will say to us, well done, my good and faithful servant. We are hoping that he will make the world new and perfect and rid it of all of its sin. We are hoping that we will live in perfection with him forever. And we're confident that this will happen. It's not a vain hope. It's not just, I hope that happens. We are confident in this hope because of faith. And faith is also assurance about what we can't see. Now, what can't we see? Well, we can't see Jesus right now. Sure, we can't, there's not a place we can go to and see Jesus. But we have assurance that Jesus really came into this world. That he was really born of Mary, that he really lived a perfect life, that he really did all of the teaching that he did, that he really performed the miracles that he performed, that he really went to the cross, that he really died a death there, taking the punishment that our sin deserves, that he really rose again so that we can have life with him and through him forever. We can't see God the Father, but we have assurance that God is our Father when we put our trust in Jesus, that we are adopted into his family. We can't see the Holy Spirit, but we have assurance that whenever we have put our trust in Jesus, that he really comes and lives in us, that he really is guiding and directing us, that he really is comforting and correcting us. We have assurance. And why do we have this assurance? Why do we have this confidence in things unseen and things hoped for? Because of faith. But what is faith? You might still be asking, you've tried to explain it there, Peter, but you're no further on. What is faith? Let's think about it this way. Faith is spiritual eyesight. It's spiritual eyesight. Faith as a gift from God to us shows us Jesus, shows us God. Faith enables us to see God. I've already quoted John Piper once, and we'll reference John Piper again here, so we will. John Piper has this great illustration about how faith is spiritual eyesight. Do you remember back in the 90s? If you weren't born there, then you can Google us when we're done. But do you remember back in the 90s, there was this big craze for magic eye books? Do you remember those? Whenever I was a kid in primary school, you used to get the book people thing out, the wee leaflet, didn't you? And then you could take it home and say, Mummy, I want to get this book, and she'd fill it out and you'd send off the money, and a week later the books would arrive in the classroom and be doled out. Well, these magic eye books, they always seem to be very popular with the book people. But do you remember what they were? They were these books that you opened up, big A3 books that you opened up, and when you first looked at it, it looked like there was just a random, really colourful pattern on the page. It was just a sort of geometric sort of pattern. But then when you focused your eyes in a certain way and you held the book at a certain angle, you would see that actually it wasn't just a pattern. There was something else there. There was actually a 3D image, it looked like, popping out of the page. Maybe it was the picture or a picture of somebody's face, or a picture of an animal, or a picture of some type of building. There was more to it than it first appeared. It wasn't just a flat pattern on a page. It was in fact a 3D image. And that's a bit like faith. Faith gives us spiritual eyesight. It enables us to see God and what he is doing. It enables us to see God. It shows us that God is real, that God is active in all of life. It shows us that God is working out his plan and is saving people. It shows us that his plan is ultimately for Jesus to come back and be with his people forever. Faith shows us that God is speaking to his people through his word. Faith is spiritual eyesight. And that faith, it hasn't changed. That spiritual eyesight hasn't changed. Chapter 11, verse 2, it's the same faith that the ancients, that those believers in the Old Testament had. They believed God. They trusted in him, and they could see what God was doing and who God is by faith. And that faith is working right now for us. The writer of Hebrews gives us an example in verse 3. None of us were there when God created the world. We weren't there. We didn't see it. But by faith, we know that God created the world. By faith, we believe the opening chapters of Genesis. By faith, we see God's fingerprints on all of creation. So, faith is spiritual eyesight. But maybe that explanation hasn't helped you that much. Maybe you're still scratching your head and trying to work out what faith is. Well then, the author of Hebrews, all of Hebrews, but of Hebrews chapter 11 then gives us examples of what faith looks like. Some of us need pictures in order to understand things, don't we? And that's what happens in the rest of the chapter. Some of us learn by seeing. That's the great thing about YouTube, isn't it? You know, I don't know, you want to make something in the kitchen, you want to make a chocolate brownie. I have no idea how to do that, but I know that I could go onto YouTube and all of a sudden there would be a little video and somebody explaining to me how to make a chocolate brownie. They'd be talking me through the process, and they'd also be showing me images of the process to help me understand it. That's what we have here in Hebrews chapter 11. We have pictures to help us understand what faith is. We have this picture here of Abel, who shows us that faith is spiritual eyesight. So as we read in Genesis chapter 4, Adam and Eve, they have sinned, they have fallen, they have done what they were not meant to do in the garden, and they've been put out of the Garden of Eden. And in due course, they have babies. First of all, they have Cain. And it's interesting that Eve says, by God's help, I was able to give birth to this child. And then later on, they have Abel. And Cain and Abel, they grow up there together in this world outside the garden as brothers together. And as time goes on, they go on their separate career paths. If you like, Cain becomes a farmer and Abel becomes a shepherd. And it comes a time to offer sacrifices. Now, we don't know anything about why they were offering these sacrifices. We don't know if God commanded them to offer these sacrifices. We don't know if one of them came up with the idea or if both of them came up with the idea. We don't know why they decided to offer sacrifices, but they decide, whether they're told by God or not, to offer these sacrifices. And Cain, he brings along some of the fruit that he has grown in the ground. And there's nothing here in the text of the Bible to suggest that this is a wrong thing for Cain to bring to God. As in, there's nothing wrong with actually bringing the fruit. That doesn't seem to be the issue here. Abel, however, brings a very different sacrifice. Abel brings a costly sacrifice. Abel brings some of the fat from the firstborn of his flock. The firstborn were those who were highly prized. They were seen as important because they had come first. And he brings this expensive, if you like, this costly sacrifice to God. And Abel's sacrifice is accepted, and Cain's isn't. Why? Why? Is it to do with what they brought? Is it because Abel brought a meat offering, if you like? Is it because something had to die? I don't think so. I think it's to do with their attitude. It's to do with their attitude. Cain seems to have just brought any old thing. Anything will do. Here, there's some of that fruit. They'll do. We'll bring those. There you go. God, thank you very much. There you go. There's your offering. Where Abel comes with a completely different attitude. He brings the best of what he has. Why? Because Abel has faith. He's righteous. He has faith. He knows God. He's like Eve. Eve is thankful that God has helped her to bring forth his son Cain. Abel is thankful that God has enabled him to have this flock of sheep or goats or whatever it is. Abel has faith. He knows who God is. He knows that God is the all-powerful creator. He knows that God is the life giver. He knows that God is a God who loves his people. He knows that God provides for his people. He knows that God cares for his people. How does he know this? By faith. He sees what God is like. And in faith then he brings this sacrifice of thankfulness. He doesn't bring this sacrifice in order to win God's favour in some way. He's not saying to God, oh, look how great I am. You must be very pleased with me. Look how wonderful I am. No, he's saying, God, thank you for what you have given me. Thank you for how you have blessed me. Here is a sacrifice of thankfulness to you. That's the attitude that is commended throughout the Old Testament. An attitude of praise and thankfulness to God for what he has done. And Abel is therefore an example to us today. We are still to sacrifice. Now, I'm not talking about bringing animal sacrifices, of course not. We believe that Jesus is the great once for all sacrifice. He is the one who has offered his blood in order that we can be cleansed from our sin, in order that we can be saved. Jesus' sacrifice is the only one that deals with our sin. But in thankfulness, we are still to offer sacrifices today, not of animals or anything like that, but of what? What are we to bring as sacrifices of thankfulness to Jesus? Well, first of all, the most obvious one is probably our money, isn't it? How's our money? We are so blessed. We are given so much by God. Here we are in the midst of this global pandemic, people losing their jobs left, right and centre. Well, it may be that those of us who have an income need to sacrifice some of that income for our brothers and sisters who are struggling because they have lost jobs due to the current world situation. What else can we sacrifice? It may be that we sacrifice our homes. What do I mean by that? Well, it may be that we need to think about bringing others into our homes to live with us. Those relatives who are perhaps cut off, lonely, isolated. At this time, perhaps we have to think about making a sacrifice in order that they can come and be part of our closer households, of our closer families. That's a challenging one to think about, isn't it? But we're all quickly thinking of excuses as to why that couldn't possibly be the sacrifice we're meant to make. I know I currently am. Maybe it's sacrifice of time. Sacrifice of time. At some point, I don't know when, but at some point these restrictions are bound to ease, and I don't know if we'll ever go back to normality as we knew it before, but there will be some kind of increase in normality. What are we going to do then? Well, the first thing lots of us are going to do is meet up with our families and spend time with them, with those loved ones we haven't seen in a long time. But it may be that we need to sacrifice some of that time in order that we can spend time together as a church family, reconnecting with one another, fellowshipping with one another, eating and drinking with one another again, in order to restore or maybe even just to begin to build relationships of encouragement and love and fellowship with one another. Our sacrifices may be our money, our space and our time, but they are to be offered from thankful hearts. We are to be thankful about what Jesus has done for us. His sacrifice completely changes our lives. It brings us from a position of being enemies of God to being his sons and daughters. There is nothing greater. He has made the greatest sacrifice, therefore we can never out-sacrifice him. And then look at this. Just as we bring things to a close here, look at this. Look at the cost of Abel's sacrifice. He didn't know this whenever he made the sacrifice. He didn't know what it was going to cost him. What did it cost him? It cost him his life. His brother is consumed by jealousy because of what Abel has done, because Abel's sacrifice has been accepted by God and his hasn't. And he ends up murdering his brother. You could argue that Abel becomes the first martyr in the whole of the Bible. His sacrifice ends up costing him his life. But that's okay. That's okay. Peter, you can't say that. How's it okay? He ends up dead. How is it okay? Because Abel had faith. Abel had faith. He knew God. By faith, he saw God. By faith, he knew what God was like. He knew that to die was going to mean to be with him. Probably didn't know that in the way that we know that today. We don't have the same level of assurance about that, but he knew that God was good by faith, and he knew that God was working out his plan. And for us today, being fixated on Jesus, having faith in Jesus, means seeing that having Jesus is more important than anything else. It means that we are willing to sacrifice everything because we've already got everything in Jesus. It means that our greatest, or the thing that we hold of greatest importance, is not our physical health and physical safety. It's not the preservation of our physical bodies at all costs. It's not. It's not. It means that we are willing, if necessary, to lay down our lives for Jesus. Why? Because in him we've got everything. We've got it all. We know God. We see God. We see that what lies ahead of us is better than anything that lies around us. It means that we are able to travel on the dangerous path of love. There is no sacrifice that is too big to make for the one who sacrificed himself for us.